want the system to look maybe from top to bottom and things of that nature. So at this point, I would like to open it up unless either Sean or Melissa have something they want to add. I would like to open it up to the trustees just to kind of kick some things around. Anybody want to go? Want to share some ideas?
Yeah, I have a question. Okay, so I went over what was sent out via email, labeled revised January 22nd, 2025. So these are, am I to assume that these are recommended revisions are already in here?
Yes. So to that question, so just to kind of go through the process of what we did here. So we have basically a base set of documents that we have used as bylaws and gotten approved, you know, in school systems throughout the state as well as at the DOE level. So that is, so the underlying part of it is all the compliance with state, federal regulations, 501c3s and other things like that. The discussion here is how do we make this look like Lake Wales? Okay, so what is it that you want to do? What, you know, and you've got a very unique system. You've got 7 schools, 5 conversion, 2 charters. You've got a superintendent or somebody who oversees all of the schools at some level who is an officer of this organization. So this is, you are a unicorn, okay? And so how do we make this work for what you want to do? And also a lot of the conversations that I know that Melissa and I have had is where does this fit? What is this document and where does it fit? So it's not a completely clean analogy, but it's a way of thinking about it. It's like this is the Constitution, okay? So this is the general principles and the bylaws set all that out. Some of the changes you may want to do, we definitely want to hear about, but they may not go here. They may go in an organizational chart. They may go in a policy and other things like that, and it all works in harmony, just like, you know, you have the U.S. Constitution, you know, federal law, state law, you have a state constitution which interacts as well. So what in speaking with Ms. Stewart about this was, let's have a discussion about any changes to the organization or what you want to do it, even if it's just like what is the name of this title going to be, and let's get all that together so then so that Melissa and I can work with you to make the system look like what you want it to look like.
Okay. To what Ms. Stewart mentioned, just the general compliance with guidelines. So if we don't have to discuss that, if that's in here and to your satisfaction, those revisions are in here as far as what has to be in here to meet state guidelines. I think the conversation could probably move ahead to that second phase of what does Lake Wales look like. And
yeah, so for instance, some of the basics about complying with, you know, you probably heard the term a 501c3. So we're talking about the federal IRS regulations and other things like that, your state laws, your ethics provisions, other things like that. All of the necessary and proper things are there, and it's that. So that is 85 to 90% of this. Well, yours is a little bit less. Probably more like 75 to 80% of this document is the basics of that would be contained in almost any one of our schools. You do have things that are in here that are, you know, like we talk about a system of school, we talk about a superintendent, we talk about some of these other things. This is not what a 250 seat charter school is going to look like. Yours looks different. So in terms of all the things that are necessary and proper, that's all there, in our opinion. And again, these are documents that we've used successfully in a lot of different places. So really, it's a question of discussion for you. Like, how do we make it look like Lake Wales?
Sean, for simplicity, can you kind of walk us through this document, point out the key elements that are statutory, and then the areas that are specific to us that we know what we're focusing on rather than just throwing darts?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the corporation definition is going to be, you know, that is the Lake Wales Charter School, Inc. Board and system, chart, all the rest of those definitions are a little bit unique to you. The mission and vision, every organization is going to have some statement that's here, and this was lifted from your 1023 application, which is your original IRS application, to when you got your status, you know, more than 2 decades ago. Under Article 3, the corporation section, this is very rote. Okay, this is that paragraph looks exactly like what it's going to look like for the general purpose of what it is that you're going to do, the general purpose of the corporation and the specific purpose of the corporation in terms of running charter schools. That.
Because that sentence is, that's new.
Yeah, it is. So we're talking about the things that are that are basic to the whole, to everybody. So dedication of assets and dissolution talks about what happens if you end up, if the organization ends up closing. Non-discrimination is pretty straightforward. And then the members, you don't have any members of this. So you're a corporation, you're not an LLC, you don't have a member or some other entity that maybe you would be. So we've got many charter schools that perhaps are part of a larger nationwide organization or statewide organization. That's not something that you have here. Board of Trustees is really the name that you guys use for trustees. That is unique, but most of your schools are going to look something like this. They're going to call them governing boards. They're going to call them other things along those lines. Your numbers are kind of set by the way in which you operate, and we have an 8th trustee that's a teacher representative, which I want to have a conversation with about some point. In terms of the qualifications of the board, we talk about that was lifted off of your old one, but generally, somebody who's of majority, you have some specifics about about education levels and other things like that. So your qualification section looks very unique to yours, particularly about attendance zones and where they all come from. So that's not statutory. Otherwise, the statutory responsibility would just be that you'd be a majority and that you would, pass certain background checks. So that looks different. Your terms of office is unique to you as well, in terms of the amount of term that you have term limits, when they start, how long they are. That is unique to you. The succession section in 5. In the middle of page 4 is unique to you as well. The next thing in terms of compensation and expenses, that's set forth by statute and applicable ethics rules, that you can only be reimbursed for allowable and reasonable out-of-pocket expenses. Resignation and removal, the resignation is set forth by you. Removal actually is set forth by Chapter 617-0808, but that has been incorporated in here. In terms of vacancies, that is unique to you as well. This was something that was absent from your previous one, the parent representative and principal attendance. So we made sure that this language was added in here in terms of the fact that the principals are attending the meeting, the parent representatives are attending the meeting, and it's either them physically, that they have to be physically present at your meeting, or their designee has to be physically present. And we've also talked about working that into your agendas going forward and other things like that. So that was something that was missing from your previous ones that needed to be done. So I'm about halfway down the document. Mr. Chairman, did you want to see if anybody had any questions, or you want me just to keep going?
Yeah, let's take a pause there and see if there's any questions or anything that needs to be addressed before you move on. Trustees? No.
I have a question. You mentioned about the attendance, or the, I think the attendance zones or something like that. I don't see where you were referring to that. Like where we draw from?
Yeah, there's a mention of how the different ones are, the trustees are selected. I saw that in.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yes, okay. I sorry, I thought you meant student population. Okay.
Yeah, there's a reference to attendance zone. So the trustees must reside within the attendance zone for Lake Wales area schools. So that's just unique to you.
Okay.
I have a quick question. Forgive me if I'm being naive about this, but are the parent representatives, are SAC committees, or is that something separate?
That's a different thing. That's statutorily set forth, that there's a parent representative for each one of the schools. And that is it's set forth that basically you just have to be a county resident. That's the only requirement, and be the age of majority. So parent representatives, can serve a lot of different, each board can kind of decide what it is that they do. Oftentimes, they're the liaison to that school from this entity to that school. That can be the individual board member, that can be the principal if the principal lives within the county, or that could be a parent that's there. Now, so every school, how that person interacts with them. Statutorily, the purpose behind it is that that is a person who knows what happened in the meeting and then can interact with somebody and say, this is what happened.
We have a board liaison representative for each school.
Okay.
Got it. And so that, for purposes of the statute, that is your quote, parent representative. And even though the name.
I just didn't understand the terminology that you were using versus what we're using.
Yes,
Yeah.
the statute says parent representative, which is a bit of a misnomer because they don't have to be a parent. It's really referring to someone who interacts with parents and is a representative of their comments. Their information is on the website for each of the schools, that kind of thing.
Okay, thank you. So that's a compliance addition.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And Sean, I think when we had the discussion about the parent representative, you mentioned, because I know the principal can be one as well as a board member,
Correct.
that maybe not so much of a good idea to have it the same person in case.
So this is where there's a difference of opinion. So sometimes the principal being the parent representative can be a good thing, but if the parent has an issue with the principal, then being the board liaison may not be the best situation to have. And so maybe you have somebody else over there. But also on the reverse of that is that a lot of times board members boards maybe would choose not to have a parent be the parent representative, because then they may be thinking more about what's in their interest as their child, as opposed to so their interest may not be aligned with the board. So the parent representative to the board may not be aligned with the way that the board is thinking about things as a whole. They're thinking about it, how would I think about it just as my child? They're both valid points, and so we have clients who come down on both sides of that, but it's a policy decision for this board to make in how you choose that person.
What was the term you used for your parent representatives? What was the term that you called
It's a
them?
board liaison,
The
board
liaison.
representative.
I almost wonder if the section could say, use the term that's used and then say that this is the quote parent representative for
From that
purposes of the
subsection.
statute.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a comment in here on your, and you see in the board packet that there's a comment about is this being done, and it needs to be reflected, but I can add an additional comment in here to talk about the fact that we can incorporate the parent liaison.
And the principals post that on the website, on the school website.
Okay, good.
Yep.
So,
Okay. So picking back up where I stopped at the top of page 5 in the selection process. So this is all, normally the bylaws will address in somehow the way that this occurs. This has been lifted from your process. And I know that several of us have gone through this, but 8 or 9 pairs of eyes would be good, because we want to make sure that this is perfect, that this is exactly what's happening here. So your selection of trustees, again, there's a way in which it gets done, but this is very unique to you in the way that this occurs. That you've got different nominating committees, you've got the selection process, you've got a city representative that's appointed, or one that's appointed by the city. You've got the teacher nomination. So there's a lot of different things in here that are pretty unique. So this is your opportunity to look at it. If there's something problematic, let us know, and you can discuss that as a board. What we put forward to you, we think represents what's here and is legal. The terms, the ideas about the rotating teacher nominations, we want to make sure that that is correct. Right now, it shows that Lake Wells High School, it's their year to be representative, and then next will be Polk Avenue Elementary. So We just want to make sure that is correct. If for some reason you want to change that order, this is the time to do it. And that's going to be kind of a common thing, which is that, when you go to vote to change the bylaws, particularly it's something that's very sweeping like this, there's a lot that's on the table, but we also want to make sure that we get it right. So that's why we're going to bring it forward, not only for this, but I think it would not be voted on today, right? We're going to look at it and come back at least, at your next monthly meeting before it would actually be adopted. Okay, so going forward, we have the nomination by the City of Lake Wales. We have the nominating committee and the way in which that works, and then the final selection, which is kind of laid out in there. Moving forward in terms of to the powers and duties, of course, a governing board, the Board of Trustees, is going to be a policy level board, right? So so that's generally what it is that you do, and your school principals, administrators implement those policies. So this idea about powers and duties is generally a discussion about what are the different things of which they do, what you do as a Board of Trustees. And that's all laid out in here. And this is partially a work of our model bylaws and incorporating a lot of the things that you had in here in terms of things that were idiosyncratic to your bylaws. Now, some of the things that are in here, and this is where we're going to start to get into a few things that are highlighted in yellow for discussion in terms of like where do some of these documents go and other things like that. So that's a conversation not only for you, but also for for Al Rickey and his staff to kind of weigh in on. And so so this idea about what are the things that the board does under powers and duties, as you see, it goes on for a significant period of time, and that lays out really what are the different things that you do. So when you consider things that come before you in terms of policies, you can look at this list and say, these are the things that we're here to do, and where is it that it fits. You've got A through P here, which generally, when you consider something before the board, you should look and say, are we meeting what is our charge under the bylaws to do? And that's basically what this is laid out as. Attendance is something, amongst you and your members in terms of talking about attending a certain number of meetings. Obviously, all of you are volunteers, and I know Melissa and I always tell our volunteer board members thank you for your service, and to make sure that you understand that. So in terms of, there's a number in there that's just like 30%. You guys can discuss whether you wanted to do that or not. I know we're meeting at an irregular time and somebody was ill today, and so obviously you're going to miss meetings, but that is really there for the person who just disappears and never comes back. And if you want to remove them as a board, you have the ability to do it. I think as we get into 7 and page 8 is probably where there's going to be the most discussion at today's meeting, which is really talking about officers and duties and what do those things look like.
Now back to the attendance, the 30% number, was that from our previous, or was that something that you added?
No, sir. That was something that we just kind of have as our base number. Okay. That is 100%, no pun intended, negotiable. That's up for you to decide what you want to do with that. Gotcha. That has not come from any statutory or any other provision of something like that. So generally, boards are going to meet anywhere from 6 to 12 times a year. And so that's really kind of what we had just kind of put that in there as a suggestion. So certainly, you can do that, and it's up to you to enforce. Obviously, if somebody got ill for an extended period of time, it's not something that's mandatory for you to do or mandatory to enforce in terms of attendance. But again, we've had several, if somebody takes a board seat and they've got a couple years left in their term and they just stop coming, it gives you something very easy to look at and say, this is the reason why we're going to dismiss this person. Okay, so as we get into officers, you have, again, chair, vice chair, secretary, This is, Mr. Chair, I'll tell you, this is different. This is not, this has people on this officer group that looks different than what we have in a lot of other situations. We may have, there's not a designation of a treasurer here. There's a designation of a CFO, which is perfectly acceptable. It just looks different. Most entities need to have a chair and a secretary. I usually tell them to have a treasurer, but you have a CFO. So basically you have to have somebody in that financial role on the board. And most schools don't have a central office like you do. So again, this looks different. In Melissa and I's experience, this is going to look completely different.
And something to take note of, your CFO and if we do talk about CEO, those are officers, but they can't be board members because they're employees. And so that will be a distinction. And a lot of times you will see that's why a charter school won't have officers who are staff members, but the officer's duties can be delegated to a staff member. That's just an example of how it's done. In this organization, though, there's this central office, and so you need individuals, whether you call them CFO or CEO, who have oversight and control over the operations of that central office. So those roles, CFO, and then whatever you want to call the individual who is over the operations of the entire system, CEO, superintendent, executive director, whatever that name is, those individuals will be employees. They can be officers of the organization, but the bylaws need to reflect that they're not board members. They can still brief you. They're not covered by the Sunshine Law. They're true staff members. And to have that carried through in the bylaws and the policies.
And that's the way this organization was set up. It being a volunteer board, of course, we all work regular jobs in addition to this, so we can't serve as a treasurer capacity. That's why it says a non-member being a CFO and also secretary. So.
Yeah. And one of the things to think about is how much of the senior leadership at the central office is going to be an officer. Your CEO, your CFO, and right now the CEO or superintendent, again, that's something we're going to address here and decide what we want to do. But we've heard a lot of questions about, well, what about like a chief academic officer? You could put them here, but I think our advice would be not to, because you're starting to get too far down the chain.
I don't see why you would.
And why would you have them there? So that's why we get some questions about, well, do we want to have this structure or that structure? And that's why, again, you have your bylaws and then you have your org chart, which is more of like, okay, that these are the employees. This is what's here. And the top, this is the entire organization. So the Board of Trustees, of course, is the very top of that organization. And then what does it look like going down from there? And what positions do you want to have? And finally, the other thing is that if you create officerships and you have this, director of, if you had a chief academic officer, and then you find out you don't like that and you don't want that position anymore, or you may like it, you don't have to revise your bylaws, right? And you don't have to go through all of that. Those are staff positions that you can do. You can change. You can say, this year we want to try this other thing. You don't have to do all this revision. You don't have to submit it to your sponsor. You don't have to get us involved to change all of that. That's one of the, so for any of you who may have that question, that's why that's limited to the number of officers that we have here.
Yeah, the CEO and superintendent, the CFO and the secretary have never been a part of the board body.
Right. Okay. And then, so that comes down through here in terms of other things, vacancy, we put a provision in there for that. In terms of committees, that's pretty standard language. We did add in here just to make sure that your committees like this one, would be noticed to have, that you would follow all the same noticing and public records. I'm sorry, for Sunshine and all the other things. You have a meeting minutes and an agenda and everything else like that you would normally have. There's a process for the election of officers, which we put in here, and talk about how that works. As we get into the final parts in here in terms of board meetings, did you want to say something?
Yep. With respect to election of officers, though, this may be a place where if the trustees want to retain the secretary, CFO, and then superintendent, CEO as staff members, then those would not be officers who are elected. So that would be a change here. If that's where the trustees want to go, you're not electing, you're hiring those individuals. Or however it is.
You've hired somebody who's going to hire those folks.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So that would be, again, as when you guys come up, it's this discussion we're going to have. In terms of board meeting, a lot of this is pretty straightforward. We did choose the date of June. That's in here. That was a choice that was made. Feel free to do that. And by the way, if you have a meeting in June and it doesn't work out and it becomes May or July, just notice it as the meeting under this. So don't feel like you're strictly, held to that. If we have a hurricane or whatever and you lose the June meeting, all's not lost. You can make that up. We talk about special meetings and how that's done. The executive committee point that's in here is unique to you. A lot of entities don't necessarily have an executive committee, and this is something that could be a discussion point. It's not necessarily invoked very often, but the idea that if for some reason you can't get the board together, that these folks would have the ability to act on behalf of the board is to do what's necessary in between meetings, and generally that's going to be something that's either a special meeting or an emergency. I know I used Melissa and I during Hurricane Milton this year basically had the county show up and say, we're taking your school, we're using it as an emergency shelter, and we had to just act, and we got a board meeting together in less than 24 hours notice, got it together. It was just a couple hours notice, frankly.
But that was an example of an emergency meeting. Now we have for a charter school. Yes.
So in any event, they showed up and said, we need your school as a shelter. So we did that. Compliance with Sunshine Law, open meetings, quorum. These are all things that are set forth that in statute. Now the decision under quorum was made to allow for electronic attendance or via Zoom or other things like that. I went ahead and made that decision that you could do that. You may have a policy that you only want to do that under extraordinary circumstances, or you may have a policy that you do at every meeting. I have boards that I don't know when the last time they were all together, and that's a choice that they made. Other boards want to be absolutely in person, and it's the only way that they're going to meet. But we have the quorum set up in terms of the majority of the folks, and how you do that, and the fact that you're able to do that via electronic media, which Zoom and other things along those lines. Under management, this is a unique section that typically we don't necessarily have, but it is been written in a way which we think is legally compliant. The section A talks about control and regulation management of the system. The superintendent role, we've used your existing term for that. Superintendent role is laid out, and there were some decisions made here after discussing with you guys, but we'd like to get your blessing today that this is the standard that you want to set forth, and just basically going through it in some detail. The superintendent shall be the CEO for day-to-day operations in accordance with policies and practices. The next decision was the superintendent shall have the power to hire and directly supervise basically the principals. The superintendent shall also supervise the CFO, so the CFO reports to the superintendent. The superintendent would then create the budget for the system, subject to approval of the board. And then that system's budget is comprised of budgets from each of the schools in the system. That basically the budgets come up through each of the schools. to the CEO, or through the CFO probably, and then to the CEO, and that the final decisions and budget that would be presented to the board for approval would come from the CEO's office. Okay? So that was kind of what we gathered as the consensus after speaking to everybody, but that would be something that we would ask for clarification and approval from the board today. Or at least take it, if we can't reach a decision today, at least take it under advisement. If we're able to reach a decision, then great. The CFO position has also been listed here, and it talks about what are the different responsibilities, and obviously, basically for guarding assets and other things like that, which is basically a delegation from the governing board and the board of trustees here, because that is one of your two major statutory responsibilities, is safeguarding public assets, right? The other one is academic performance, and then the third being compliance with the law. So the CFO, in essence, is going to be the officer who would be would be an officer of this board who would be making sure that that is occurring. Insurance and indemnification is pretty straightforward. We have all of that. In terms of who's going to actually do, I have a note in here about who's going to have these responsibilities for like bonds and insurance, and that's really just the titles of who are the folks that are going to be there: superintendent, the CFO. In terms of the rest of it, you asked the question like what are things that are just set forth by regulation from a bunch of different sources. Indemnification is there. Indemnification, as board members, you probably want to know, this is the idea about you're going to have errors and omissions insurance and things like that for you. Common questions that we get from boards, that's all there. And then in terms of all the insurance that's required for the entire system and other things like that, the insurance that's set forth by your charter contract, that's there as well. Fiscal year financial management. I have a note in here under B about the financial policy. I know I'm working with Al Rickey on that and making sure that that's done. The depositories, in just terms about talking about where monies are put. Your fiscal years, you probably know, is July 1 to June 30th. Your annual reports, this is set forth by statute, as well as you're going to have your district audit, your state audit, and then in terms of filing your 990 every year with the IRS. At the end, talks about how bylaws are amended, and the decision that was made there was that it'd be a minimum of 5 voting trustees. So if you've got 7 voting members, the decision was either 4 or 5. To me, I think it would make sense to set it at 5, so that you don't end up in a situation where a majority of the board could change the amendment or amend the bylaws. I think it needs to be something higher than just a majority. And I think that's basically it. All right.
It's a lot. It's a
There's
good
a lot
walkthrough.
there. That's why I'm saying it's why you guys aren't voting on this tonight.
No, absolutely not. So Tanya, you're the chair. Do you want to lead discussion on the different elements of that? Or what's your thoughts there?
I mean,
Do you wanna-
we can just, to me, kind of jump in. I think the
between more than one member of the board. So that's a way to do it under your current structure.
Exactly. So just as an example, one of the committees is the salary committee, which I am invited to attend the meetings, and I believe anyone can attend, and it's just Dr. Hutto is the only board member there, although Al Ricky is there too, the superintendent, and other staff members are there. And they're noticed, right, so.
That's right.
So that.
That's right.
Right.
That is delegated.
And other
authority.
teachers have come to those meetings at times.
Right.
Yes, yes.
Right, but to Tanya's point, if the two of you were going to have a conversation,
Separately
it would
at
have to
lunch,
be
we can't do that. Yeah.
precisely. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so that was my comment. It's a unique system and it's a unique thing, and I think I see the advantages of it, honestly. And so I may think about suggesting this to other clients at times as well. So anyway, that was just something that I noticed that was there, but you guys were, I wanted to make sure that that was being done in a compliant way. In terms of the parent representative and principal attendance, again, I'd had this conversation with Al Ricky and talked to Ms. Stewart about it as well, which is the idea about the parent representative, that each one of your schools has to have a notice of who is the parent representative for each one of those. And then in terms of the principals, if they're here, if all 7 are in attendance, or if not all of them are in attendance, then to make sure that some are designated. So if you have 1 or 3, that there's a designation as to the fact that the principal for each one of those attend. And the reason being is that in theory, if you don't have a parent representative or you don't have a principal in attendance, you didn't have a meeting. You didn't have a proper meeting. So we want to make sure that we're getting that done properly, because that's set forth by statute. So in terms of going forward, we want to make sure that we do that.
Did you want to mention the minutes?
Yeah, in terms of the fact that it's represented, that each one of those people are represented in the meeting minutes. So I would actually probably suggest that you open the meeting, and however if you adopt the agenda, you do whatever your custom is, and how you do all of that, that in that very beginning, that there's a designation, so you have your agenda, the fact that the meeting was noticed, where was it noticed, that all is in the meeting minutes, to make sure that that's done, and the fact that your parent representatives and principals are set out, and that goes into the agenda, that goes into the meeting minutes, as Melissa pointed out, to make sure that it's there.
It makes them self-proving, right? Just like on their face, and Ms. Stewart's nodding. We like this as lawyers. On its face, that meeting was compliant. You don't have to go back and determine the facts about the notice and who was there.
Yeah, because we've had to go back and read meeting minutes from 20 years ago, and if it's not on that piece of paper 20 years later, it didn't happen. So.
I noticed in our minutes, Marie always does a very good job of listing everyone in attendance, principals, and so forth. So that's actually in the meeting minutes.
Well, that's good.
That's great.
So what would you want to make sure is that if you've only got 5 principals here, that the 2 who aren't, that somebody is designated as, Bach Academy's principal today, the designee is this person.
To meet statute, would the board representative for that school fill that capacity?
They could, correct. Anybody can be the principal designee. The parent representative has to be a person who lives in the county.
Okay, so if we have a school present at the meeting without a principal, we need to ask who the parent representative for that school is, so we can designate them in the minutes?
As well as the principal. So you just have to have a designation for each one of you need to check to make sure that 2 seats, all 7 schools are met.
Okay. Gotcha.
Okay. The next question I had was just about the rotation of the schools. So I think you guys can take care of that, and making sure that that is done correctly.
And that is the correct rotation.
Okay, good. We have in here the notes, and Melissa brought this up. So I'm on the top of page 8, the comment about the officers. And so the CEO, CFO again, that's going to be something that's for a discussion point. So I don't know if you want to stop now and have that discussion, if that's how you want to do it.
Yes.
So what are your officers going to look like in terms of CEO, CFO? What are their names going to be? That would be helpful for us to know.
Well, the current structure, unless we change it, is superintendent as the leader of the organization, and then CFO is our financial position.
Okay.
Are there any discussion on that as far as?
Is there an operational difference between the two terms, or is this just, I mean, what is the difference? That's a key thing. It's more than just words, I assume.
It depends. I hate to be giving you such a lawyer answer,
Well,
but
he's
it
a
really,
JD. He's okay.
really depends. For some organizations, referring to the organizational leader as a CEO has a different connotation, but it really is all in the description of the duties. And for some organizations, they feel like CEO is more all-encompassing versus a superintendent maybe having an academic connotation because the school districts have superintendents. But a superintendent has a lot of operations and budget side to their jobs. So that's why I say the terms are used in all different ways, and it really depends on your organization. What fits your organization, and then we write in the description.
The function of our organization is more of a CEO title. We've always used superintendent, but the organization from the operational standpoint is more of a CEO of the organization.
So I have a few comments, right? So,
Okay.
excuse me. I wanted to present for discussion some ideas and thoughts that I've had, but I don't know if this is the time. If it is, then I'm glad to go into that. So I did want to discuss some proposed changes to our organizational chart. Would this be the time to kind of discuss some of those and what some titles would be and things like that?
A little bit, I think at the very top. So the organizational chart would have the board of trustees and then the next thing down from that. So if we're talking about CEO, CFO,
Okay.
basically, I think we would just, or whatever term you want to call that person, right? I think we probably would limit it to those two.
For now, okay.
You agree?
Well,
If that doesn't fit your discussion, we can skip over this and address that.
it'll enter into my discussion later, but just to share my thoughts, I think a CEO of operations would be a better term for that position, because although, of course, our mission is to educate the children of Lake Wales and surrounding communities the best that we can, we are still a business. So I would be leaning towards that, and I'll go into a lot more detail when we discuss the organizational chart.
Okay.
What do most organizations you represent, similar to our system, what title structure do they use?
I wouldn't say that there's CEO, there's executive director, there's chief of schools.
Chief
There's a lot.
educational officer.
Yeah,
So there's-
sorry.
But there's some, I'm sorry.
Yours
Eric.
Is superintendent an uncommon word?
It is uncommon amongst, but that doesn't mean it's wrong or inappropriate.
Because that's more structured to district schools.
Yeah.
But I do want to bring back a comment, though, because you said CEO of operations.
Or CEO.
And to me, that would, and that's why I wanted to ask the follow-up question. Do you still mean that there is one position that's above the others, or are you suggesting there would be two or more that report directly to the board? Because that is a difference. It may be the same names, but that is a difference than what we've proposed here and would be part of your decision as trustees.
Mhm. No, I think the CEO title is more,
Okay,
yes,
okay, as so one,
as the one.
okay, and then there
Top.
might be more at
Then there would
the
be
next
additional
level.
support people underneath there with specific things I want to discuss later.
Okay,
Yep.
got it.
Any other board input on that?
On what? Any of what we've talked about so far?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I've been trying to patiently waiting my turn down here. So I have a couple of questions about the questions that we talked about. This parent representative and principal attendance. I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I think the purpose of what we call the board liaison, whatever we officially call it, is to give parents or whoever another ear to listen to what's happening. So I think for the statutory thing, so you have to have a parent representative and a principal? So okay, all right.
It can be the same person, but it contemplates two.
Okay.
I think the policy was that there would be two, but they've left it as a designee, so it can be one.
Okay.
If you'd like it to be.
And the parent representative can be an employee, a board member, a parent, just as long as they are over 18 and a resident of this
Okay.
county. Yeah.
So, but that's not somebody that we have to designate. We can designate it every month?
Correct.
Yes, but that information has to go to the parents and be on your website.
Got it.
So it may not be practical to
Okay.
change it each month.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So we could do that. Hey, here's your board liaison, here's your parent representative, your board person, and then your principal is the other person. Okay. All right. Let's see. I think I know we talked through this, but our secretary and CFO or whatever are not going to be members of the board, right? They're not going to be officers. Did we determine that?
That's for you to decide if you want a separate secretary as somebody who's not on the board.
They just wouldn't be elected, but they could still be officers.
Okay. I don't know how you guys feel about
Because
that.
currently, we nominate and vote on who the CFO and the secretary for the board is, but they're not on the board. Does that meet that requirement?
How does that nomination work if
By
they're...
the board members.
Is it part of an employment process, or, because the secretary and CFO are both employees, and so when you do your officer elections, could it be some other person who's employed by Lake Wales Charter Schools?
Could it be a kindergarten teacher that ends up in Marie's chair?
Could be anybody.
Secretary, but not CFO.
It could be a
Correct.
kindergarten teacher and CFO, right?
Correct.
I mean, it shouldn't even be, it should be somebody that has.
So that's
that
my
knows the office
point,
that's in
is
Marie's
that,
position.
those
to me.
positions are staff positions, they shouldn't be elected, those individuals are hired, and if you wanted your triangle, where you have one head of the organization, then that person would hire that person or recommend who they are to this board, and this board would, those are two different ways to do it.
Right.
But that would be the structure.
This is the way our previous attorney set it up, so this is new to me.
Yeah,
So I'm-
so often,
Yeah.
so
I just never understood why we did that. It didn't make sense to me because, for example, Ricky, he's the CFO. That's his job. Why do I need to elect him?
I think the reason behind it was that it's analogous to a treasurer. See, when you look at the section, this is, I haven't spoken with him, so I don't know what the rationale was. But it does make sense in that it was, the list of officers didn't include the superintendent. It just has the CFO.
Right.
Which is analogous to the treasurer. But as you all are larger now and you have this clear central office position, if the CFO is an officer, then your CEO or superintendent needs to be an officer too. And so this is part of looking at this as, what is your system now, and what is it going to need for the next, 50 years?
And to the point about the secretary, I think the board secretary in most corporate sentences is going to be the person who attests to things that occurred, not necessarily the person who takes the meeting minutes. Oftentimes it is the same person, but again, you don't have organizations that have all these resources, right?
Sure.
You can have we've got schools that are as small as the ARC that it has 20 kids in it. Okay, now they've got 5 board members and they've got a lot of community support and other things like that. But the board secretary is the person who would attest to like a resolution. So like if you pass a resolution, the board secretary signs it, the articles incorporate the annual reports, other things like that. It's often a ceremonial thing that they do, and it's not necessarily the working thing. So the secretary, so somebody else can be appointed to do the meeting minutes, to put up all the boards. You have staff, who does all that, but you don't, but one of the 7 of you, in my opinion, should be the secretary.
After you're explaining it, it makes more sense that way.
Yeah, I think I would really recommend that.
Sounds like this was a combination of a service club and a corporation, bylaws combined.
But that's not unusual either
Sure.
for charter schools that were founded, the time frame you all were founded.
Sure.
A lot of the basis for the bylaws for charter schools when they were first authorized in our state were just what you described.
Yeah.
And so just there's been an evolution, certainly in the size of your organization and its function.
My opinion on this is we need to structure that so that the treasurer, we change that to treasurer and secretary and make that a board position, and we can appoint someone to actually do the duty of the minutes. I mean, that's my opinion.
That would look a lot more like like what the
What you're
majority of
saying.
our things
Yeah.
do. And honestly, I'd be a little more comfortable with it. And then I think you would just have the CEO, executive director, whatever you want to call that person, the superintendent,
Right.
that person be an officer, take the CFO out, have a treasurer or secretary, and it looks
The
more.
treasurer and the secretary can still be employees, or no, because they're board members?
No, they would be board members. Now, you would have paid staff that would do the work with them. So
Right,
typically,
the CFO would work with the treasurer. So the CFO.
The CFO
and
could still
treasurer.
come and give the treasurer's report and do all those things,
Got
but
it.
your actual board member serving as a treasurer would be filling that officer capacity.
correct. And typically, the treasurer would be the board liaison looking over staff for the financial responsibility of it. So in other words, there's somebody on the board who is the finance person who, they don't have to be. You can run a business, you just have financial acumen, or they could be a CPA, they could be a financial advisor, it could be whatever, that has some professional, that's what they do as a profession. And they are like the chair of your budget committee or your finance committee, and there are the board member who you look at staff and say, okay, this is what happened, and then treasurer, do you agree? Do you have any concerns about this? And then off. That's the typical structure. You don't have to do that, but there is a reason why the majority of boards, I think, do that. So.
I mean, I think part of our, steps of going through this is to make sure that, number one, we're in compliance, and also to set up our system so that we can continue in a very positive way and operate in a good operational manner. So, I mean, I don't want to go through this and then kind of just skip over stuff because it doesn't feel good.
Right. So,
And to your point, best practices are best practices for a reason. So if that's the standard,
I think so.
then I would recommend that.
Because I think so for instance, with the treasurer position, you have one board member who really engages on the budget, right? And so now you've really got somebody on the board. Now, you don't have 7 people looking at each other thinking, you got it. No, somebody has it, right? And that's it. The person who frankly, and again, they could be a subject matter expertise. We've done a ton more with finance and school
Well,
finance.
that fits in with the structure of our board because we have someone in law, we have someone in finance, we have someone in business, we have
Sure.
someone in education. So we've structured our board so that all of the key elements of the operation are covered by somebody that's a subject matter expert.
Yeah.
So if you already have somebody in the finance field, they could certainly serve as treasurer.
Right, because they can talk the language
Right.
of the staff. So.
Okay? Any other board input on that?
Going back to the organizational chart, I just want to caution that there is still a lot of mistrust among our employees. I've heard from a few principals and teachers that we were going to vote on our organizational chart tonight with the intention of appointing. So I'm okay with us revisiting, but I really want to caution us to get the input of our principals if we are going to revisit our organizational structure. Because being in education, I feel like the top person, it needs to be something academic in their title. And going to CEOs, if I was a principal in this system, I would feel this board was taking my power away by naming the head person the CEO, because we've said over and over, our principals are the CEOs of their school. So I would just be afraid of that, just the interpretations that people may have, just to get more input if we are going to revisit the organizational structure.
We're not voting on any of these items tonight. So this is all just discussion. Okay.
All right, so
So it sounds like the consensus of the board is to replace CFO and treasurer with treasurer and secretary, and we'll make that a board position.
I agree.
okay, great. All right.
Sorry for all of you struggling through this. This is a painful process.
Do you want to, this was your thing, you want to take it up? I can discuss it, or you want to take it up?
It's painful for us too.
Any all duties of the chair.
Where you at, Sean?
So we had marked this, the chair may delegate as needed to any any officer, any and all duties of the chair. We think that that's a little expansive. That's language that's in your current language.
Typically, what you'd see is the vice chair would serve in the role of chair if the chair cannot serve in that role.
So I think what we're saying is that we took that out of there, but I
would agree with that, because in the vice chair's description, it says in the absence of the chair that the vice chair would serve that role.
right. So you didn't strike me as the one who would just delegate all your duties and walk away. But I was wondering if there was some particular reason why that was there.
I have no idea.
All right, let's just strike it.
Yep.
Okay. So that was where we kind of measured that. Okay, so the treasurer and the CFO position was my next comment, which we discussed. Removal of officers. Of course, this is something, this is sad when this happens, and thankfully it doesn't happen very often. But this has in here the language about 2/3, the majority, and other things like that. My recommendation would be just to replace it with the statute and just say statutorily this is what's here, because the statute occupies the field. In fact, it says if your bylaws will say this, and if it says something contrary, it will say this, that the legislature in essence tried to do that. So I want to make sure we don't have anything that's there. So we're just going to write in, will be done as set forth by section 6170808, which is the provision of it that talks about that. Committees is the next thing that's here. Do you, as a board, right now we put in very generic language. It talks about the fact that you can have committees from time to time and you can establish them, take them away, other things like that. Now, you as an organization have a SAC, and that's completely understand that. But are there any other standing committees of this board that you have that meet regularly? I mean, obviously, we're meeting as the governance committee right now. Do you have any other regularly occurring committees that you want us to put in here, or do you want to just have it left generic?
I mean, I have some committees that I've established, but they're not standing committees. They're based on situation. I mean, we have an audit committee, we have a 1919 building committee, we have bylaws review committee.
Payroll.
We have a teacher compensation committee. We have a scholarship committee. So, I mean, we do have a good number of committees.
Do you want to put them in the bylaws, or do you want to leave it?
I don't think they should be in the bylaws.
Okay. Some are very firm that they want this, and that way it's always there. But we left it generic, and that's a completely, completely understandable way to go as well. Big scrolling down now, which is good. There is what's written in, so this is a little bit of detail, and this is just kind of confirmation of the idea. So superintendent, CEO, whatever that is that you're going to have in that position, makes hiring recommendations for principals, and then those recommendations are acted on by the board. So in other words, the board approves the hiring and retention, in essence, of the principal at every one of the school locations.
It's been that way since day one.
Okay, perfect. And in terms of the CFO position, as I understand that you would have, which I'm just going to call it a chief executive position for now. You have chief executive position. Is the CFO going to be hired by, and you're going to now have a treasurer, is the CFO going to be hired by the chief executive, or is the CFO going to be hired by the board?
It's been that way.
Okay.
Which way? That
It's hired, the CFO is hired by the chief executive. Okay.
okay.
Is there any input on that? I mean, that's the way it's always been, so.
My next comment was, do you want to go?
So if the chief financial officer is hired by the chief executive, does this section on chief financial officer then get removed, and then we'll have treasurer up and officers?
That's what I was thinking we were going to do. Yeah.
Is everyone in agreement with that? Okay.
All right.
From a compliance standpoint, that would make sense, correct?
I think so. Okay. The next comment has been answered. Separate financial policy is still something that Ricky and I can work on. And that was all of the comments that I had. So I don't know if that, I think through our discussion, again, we have a chief executive position. It sounds like there may want to be some more discussion of what you call that person, so I'm just going to leave a title.
Yep.
I'll highlight it for board members as a
Yep.
discussion piece of like, what is this title going to be?
Yep.
But I think we have an idea of what it is that that person does. And I think we have all the rest of the direction that I needed. Did you have any outstanding questions, Melissa? That doesn't mean we may not think of one before the end of the meeting.
I just want to clarify, just to go back to the principals and the CFO. So the principals will be confirmed by the board, correct? So the CFO going to be confirmed by the board as well?
I think Danny said that it was that the CEO hires the CFO. Did you say CEO
Okay.
or CFO?
CFO. So the CEO will hire the CFO.
That's what I understood.
Okay, so the CFO.
Unless you want to change that as a board.
But I'm just thinking in terms of a generic organizational chart. You got a CEO, CFO, and then your principals. Is that, am I right in that?
I think it may be chief executive, the CFO will come over this direction. Like, kind of, you'd have a line over here, because then you may have people who work directly for the CFO.
Okay.
I don't think that I don't think the principals report to the CFO. I think they may work with the CFO.
Okay.
But I don't think that the principals don't report to the CFO. They would eventually report to the chief executive. Would there be anybody in between them? That's your decision. If you had like a chief academic officer, would the principals report to that person, or would they work with that person?
Like they would work with the CFO.
Right.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah, because that's, I guess, my question to the trustees. Is the board going to confirm the CFO as well? Or they're just going to let the CEO hire and that be that?
Have we confirmed the CFO before? Have we confirmed? Has the board historically confirmed the CFO in the past?
No.
No. So, unless there's a difference of opinion, that's worked.
I've got to say something. I just want, I'm gonna, maybe I'll speak for all of us, but I'm gonna speak for me. You can agree or not agree. My concern here on this board, and the reason that I took this job, is because I believed in the mission statement of providing the best public education of the kids in our community. And I made a promise to Robin Gibson as well that my goal is to be a high-performing charter system, not a school system. We spend so much time worried about who's got what job, who's doing what in the central office. We need to be worried about the education of our kids and what's happening in our schools. I'm not, principals don't run the system. They need to run the schools. They need to be worried about facilities, test scores, staff development, things like that. It's like we take one step forward and then we take 2 steps back. Things are going to change, and it's all going to change so that we can provide the best public education to the kids in our school. So the rest of that stuff, who does what, all that, I mean, yeah, we got to get this, we got to get a playbook, and that's what we're trying to do, is set this organization up so that we can ultimately go to our mission statement. So that's it. This rumor stuff about we're trying to do this, I don't have time for that. None of us do. We all have other things to do. So these rumors that go around, they're just rumors. People are going to talk. You can't stop it. But I wish I just knew where all this came from. And one day I'll find out. But anyway, that's it. I better be quiet.
I understand that the rumors can be frustrating, and working on this board, I really do believe that all of you are up here in good faith. But I think it is a mistake to dismiss the distrust among the employees, because it is real. And what Dr. Hutto said before, I fielded a whole bunch of questions. I literally got multiple people sending me emails saying they're picking the CEO today. And I was like, that's not what's happening. That's not on the... To just straight out dismiss it is to say that there is a fundamental mistrust among employees and we're going to ignore it. It's a real thing.
I'm saying we have a cultural issue is what I'm saying. We got to fix it. That's what I'm saying. Don't misunderstand me, Michael. I know it's real. Trust me, I hear it myself. I'm just telling you from our perspective, from my perspective, I don't know how to fix that. Because it does come about. The rumors come about. Like, who in the world would say that we're going to pick a CEO today? Like, I mean, who makes that up? You know what I'm saying? So you're right about that. There is. Where does that come from? I think it's it's a long-standing cultural sickness that we have, and we got to fix it. And the only way we can fix that is by doing exactly what we're doing here, and that's being open, having these meetings, trying to restructure everything so that everybody, I don't ever want to be in a situation like we were this past year where we get into a situation and we go, well, what do we do? I don't know. What do we do? There's been a lot of work gone into this, and so everything we do is going to be right here. So I'm with you, Mike. I wasn't against that. I just want to know where it starts.
Okay. Thank y'all for sharing. Sean, anything else on here you have questions on before moving forward with your document that you can share with Tanya, the chair, and iron out anything there?
Nope, I think we're good.
So, but before we move forward, I did want to just make sure, because I thought there was some, and I may be mistaken, some mention, and I don't know if it was specific, in the prior bylaw that CFO would be confirmed by the board. Now,
Well, the principals are, it makes sense that the CFO was.
It would have been, because it was an officer position.
Yeah.
So it would have been elected.
okay, then that makes
Yeah. So this would be
A change.
I know that discussion came up at one time, and it might have been in one of the drafts of the previous, because we've been through several drafts of bylaws. Whoever the chair was before you, anyway, I can't remember, but there were some different drafts of that, and I do remember seeing that in one of the drafts, but it never came before the board for discussion. So.
All right, so I would assume the board is kind of just like no CFO won't be confirmed, or?
Well, we'll talk about that. We'll go through that discussion in the next item that's on the agenda.
Okay.
So
I jumped the gun. Okay.
I just wanted to make sure we got through this part. This was very painful, painstaking, and a lot of discussion, but very necessary because our bylaws were severely antiquated and not in compliance.
So Danny, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
Okay.
so I think, and having a discussion with Melissa was, I think our questions, I think what Raphael wants to talk about is more a policy, structural procedure thing. The bylaws are pretty generic. Is that fair?
Well, I wouldn't say generic, but like Sean said, they're the Constitution, so they're
Right.
not detail specific.
Right.
Where your policies, procedures would be very detail specific in exact task.
Got it.
But that title would be in the bylaws somewhere. So once we decide what that is, that's an easy fix, and we can just change that. Even if you move forward with superintendent the way it is, and we end up making that change, you just make a revision and we do an amendment to it.
Okay.
So, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So for discussion's sake, anything else on this before we move forward?
Are we coming back to the discussion of CEO, superintendent?
That's the next item on the agenda.
That's what I thought. Just making sure, because I had thoughts on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to close this out before we
Yep,
move
I
on to the next. Okay. All right, so the next item, and we'll need you on this too, so don't leave us. The next item is the CEO, Executive Director, Superintendent selection process. Now, last week, I don't remember what day, forgive me, I sent an email to Marie asking her to send instructions to the board on a couple things. One was to look at a presentation of how we move forward, which path we take. I don't have that in front of me. Is it in our packet, Marie? That, probably not. No, it's not in there. But the presentation was how we move forward. Do we do an in-house? Do we do external? Do we do search firm? All of those options, and it gave you the pros and cons of all of that. So I sent that to you for a couple reasons. One, to start an item of discussion so we can start talking about that. So, because we need to figure out what this person looks like, he or she. We need to figure out what their qualifications and what we want that person to do as a job and how we get there. So the process of how we go about hiring that individual. So part of the task I gave was for you, each of you to come up with a list of what you thought were key credentials, elements of that position. And the reason for that is I want all the board input on this. So I want everybody to have a piece of this. So if we are all deciding of who our next leader is and what they're to look like and what their job is going to be and how they do it, I want everybody's input on that. So I'll start on the end down there, Andy. I'll let you go first. And if you have listed your key elements and done your homework, I know you had a busy weekend. You had to do a lot of, okay. So if you have input, I want all of us to share that in public forum so that we can then, also, I asked Dr. Lynn Johnson, who is not here, she had a prior obligation to serve as the chair of the selection committee. So she has agreed to serve as the chair of that committee. So based on all the input that we provide today, and then further input if you have, want to email or get more clarification on things that you've thought of over the next few weeks and those kind of things to Marie, then she can share that with the committee chair on that. And then she can bring forth a presentation proposal next month for us to start further discussion on. Does that sound good?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm still a little, I could be sold either way on whether we have a superintendent or if we have an education person and an operations person. I don't really have an opinion on that yet. I go back and forth because I look at superintendent. Do we really need a superintendent? What we need is an educational, I don't know what you call him. Call him an educational specialist and an operations person. Could it be the same person? Sure. So I'm not arguing for or against that, but I've got, how many pages would you say that was? 7 or 8 pages of stuff here. But I just wrote down a bunch of things about development, implementation, evaluation of educational programs, including curriculum, things like that. Guidance, supervision, instruction in areas of school leadership, school management, school operations, qualifications, teaching certification, all the 10 years experience. There's all kinds of these things. Creating processes, communication, skills. I went kind of deep on this, I guess a little overkill. But I got several different things about some of the things that professional growth and improvement, the systematic functions, all those things. A lot of this I think we're going to take care of before we identify this person. But so I guess for me, what I would say is whatever we come to an agreement on is what's the best process. Do we go, with a search firm? Do we do it in-house? Do we do it statewide? Do we do it nationwide? I'm not moved one way or the other. I just want the best person for the job. So
Marie added the process to the board packet, so we'll go through that in a minute. Do you have any key specific elements that you think this person should have that is specific to us in addition to normal superintendent, CEO type?
not really.
Anything that you feel like is just an absolute, this is what I would like to target. And if you don't have anything specific, you can work on that and email that to Marie.
Yeah. Okay, not yet.
Okay.
Too early.
Tanya, anything that you have that you really want to voice about that position, key requirements, qualifications, skill sets, anything that stands out other than the norm?
I don't. I can't think of anything actually specific. I will tell you, I'm kind of the position, and I'm swayable, but I'm leaning toward the side that we do the corporate structure. More so CEO, executive director, or whatever we're going to call it, and have academic professionals under that to help, with the, even if we did the elementary schools and had somebody else do the high schools and the middle schools, if we had two people with that. But I am kind of leaning toward that way.
What does that look like?
Well, it looks like, to me, executive director or CEO.
Okay.
And possibly educational director, 1 and 2, or whatever you want to have. I just
Okay.
feel like that would be a more conducive system for how we're set up.
Okay. Laura, you got anything?
Yeah, we're not a charter school, we're a charter school district. And I still feel we need the organization that a school district has. We're not just one charter, we're a charter system. So I still feel like we need that kind of superintendent structure. But just with our last choice, we went by what checked the boxes. What I would like to see is somebody that has clinical educator background. What that is development of teachers. Because, like if I have an intern that I'm placing at one of our schools from Warner, the teacher they're with has to have specialized training in how to mentor new teachers. So I'd like to see somebody with that mentorship, professional development background that's able to communicate both with teachers and administrators and develop in a positive way.
Okay. Raphael, anything top of mind with you?
Yes. So we're talking, we're getting into Ms. Stewart mentioning some organizational structure changes. You're asking for recommendations for the top person, but that kind of conversation from my perspective kind of goes hand in hand. So I don't want to be out of line in our conversation, but I'm just going to kind of, throw it out there. So in research of newer schools going charter, new charter schools popping up, and some brief discussions with our new council, I brought up the possibilities of having our organizational structure look more similar to what some others are looking like out there. I am leaning towards having discussions over a CEO and a director of primary and a director of secondary education. And here's my reasoning behind those things, right? So we've got a lot of business challenges in front of us, right? In the future, we've got this town going to double in population. We've got business challenges with our sponsor district that we're going to have to address. We've got growth challenges. How are we going to meet the growth of the folks coming in? How are we going to service them? All those are business challenges, right? So I would like our CEO to be a business expert, to be able to maneuver through those challenges. Now, can one person be an education expert and a business expert? Sure. But that's almost, I think when I spoke to our council, I mentioned, is that a unicorn? And council said, well, yes, but there are some unicorns out there. I think he gave an example of one particular individual. But at the end of the day, it's hard to accomplish all those things in one person. So why a director of primary education or primary secondary education? I know we've only got one high school at this point, but again, we've got to look at the future. We have to see either we expand the high school with the land available around here to grow, or we plan another high school. I think at some point that's going to have to occur. So a director of secondary education would help facilitate that growth. I don't want to change the organizational structure last minute. Let's say the day comes where we do have a second high school, we grow the high school that we have. Now we've got to scramble to choose a director of secondary education. I think we should future-proof Lake Wales Charter Schools now and get us ready for that. Another reason that I think that organizational structure would benefit us, since day one, our principals have had nowhere to go. We have senior principals, we have principals that have been in their positions a long time with really very little chance of doing anything else but being a principal. I think having directors of primary and secondary education would give those principals that aspire to grow, to do more, give them somewhere to go, somewhere to aspire to reach, instead of leaving our system to go somewhere else where they can expand, their career aspirations. So, because of all that, I'd like to have that discussion. Does that help? Okay.
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts. And, Raphael, I appreciate your thoughts because you're making me rethink some of my thoughts. The first thing I am still kind of wondering, and I was saying this before, is why the change? Like, what exactly is the benefit of making the change? And, one thing that we should just be aware of is, yes, there's a fair number of staff members that are really paying attention, but there's a fair number of staff members who are 20% paying attention. And they're all going to see a name change, and there's underlying mistrust, and they're going to see a name change with the mistrust. And so, like, if we're going to change the name, it should be for a good reason. And Raphael, you did just lay out some good reasons. And I think the single most important thing about going forward is openness, is shine the light on all of this. And just as a side note, like, for most of the years that I've been teaching at this high school, I have pretty much just kept my head down and worked with my students. My colleagues sort of voluntold me to take this position. I didn't ask for this, but I was asked to take it, and I like this school and I like my colleagues, so I agreed to do it. In the last superintendent search, I was not paying attention at all. I know there was a lot of drama around it, but I can't tell you what happened at all. But I can tell you that the last superintendent search is a major source of some of the mistrust. And we cannot do that again. I don't know exactly what happened, but it's got to be all out there in the open. My initial thought was that my initial thought was I don't understand the CEO versus the superintendent, because to me, education is the operation. Right. And so the person leading the organization the primary operation is education. And so the primary person leading the operation should have teaching experience, have administration experience, frankly, I think have been a principal. However, Raphael makes a good point that we have business issues, and maybe we do need a business leader. And maybe that is the right solution. I don't know what the right solution is, but I will tell you 100%, if things change, we need a clear delineation where I can show people in the bylaws or something, this is the positions and the rules. Not like we've changed the names and I struggle to explain to a teacher why it was changed and what it was changed for. Because if that happens, the mistrust is going to grow. Mm-hmm.
So if I can answer some of your concerns. So another reason for what I would like to discuss is because of what we've gone through over the last, 3-4 years. We've removed 2 superintendents, right? So, and each time, we've scrambled to try to figure out, how to proceed from there. Both times, it's fractured and polarized the community, right? So, I mean, if we have a CEO and then 2 directors of education, then to me, there would be at least a smooth temporary succession plan so we wouldn't have to scramble and figure out what to do. There'd be some leadership at the top level that could step in if the CEO were to, for whatever reason, leave, right? So I think that's a benefit of that structure as well. Also, to kind of minimize that polarization in the community, because now, we've got some folks, we've got 3 folks at the top leadership position. 3 heads are better than 1. Again, is it possible to find one person with all those strengths? Sure it is, but the odds are not for that, and the odds are against that. So I don't know if that helps any, but again,
I mean, you make a very good argument.
I just don't want to fracture the community again if the same thing happens.
I think that the change that you're suggesting can happen, but I guess what I'm saying is that if that change does happen, it's got to be clear to the teachers and to the administrators at each school what the CEO does and how the CEO can impact the individual schools, as opposed to how the director of higher education, like who's exactly in charge of what. Because if it's just we're creating new positions at the board level and massively increasing the office payroll, and now there's more bosses, it's not going to go over well. I'm telling you, it's not going to go over well unless it is for a clearly defined reason.
Yep. Mike, I 100% agree with you. And the whole, I'm only speaking for me, my thing would be is to minimize the cost. We're not going to, I don't want to add anything that's going to add $1 more to overhead. So I think there are also economies of scale with, when we're talking about a CEO, and we're talking about managing a $60 million budget, and then we've also got, there are things I think where we could save a ton of money by centralizing a few things. So keep bringing those up, but I'm with you. We'll go hand in hand on that one. I'm with you.
Some of the reason for this discussion is, there's several things. You got growth in the area, which changes things. We have to we can't look at where we are now. We've got to look at how we facilitate the best educational experience for the students we're going to have in 5 years, 10 years. And, we're not the same system we were 20 years ago. We're much larger. So, there are some growing pains that come with becoming a successful, bigger system. Polk County is building schools all around us, and if we're going to continue to compete there, we're going to have to find ways to bring those students in.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you do that by being the biggest and the best. If we educate our students and everybody wants to come to Lake Wales Charter School, then you're going to maintain that student body. And that should be our goal, to provide the best education that we can for our students. These structural things, these are unnecessary, or they're necessary means to get to where we want to be. But, things have changed charter school system-wise 20 years. The statutes have changed. That's why we have, the Arnold Law Firm with us. They understand those changes. They understand the structure of the system. They understand, what we have to do. So, these are painful discussions, and I agree with you. That's why I wanted to have all this in open. Everything needs to be discussed so that everybody understands where we're wanting to go and why we're wanting to get there. And, the bylaw revision, that was something that needed to be done a long time ago, and it just kept getting put off. Same thing with, with this. So, Melissa and Sean, any of the items that were brought up, anything that you can add structure-wise, or your experience with other systems that would give us some insight that we're not thinking of here?
I don't have anything. I think you're talking about all the right things.
Okay.
I think you're considering all the right things. Eventually, these are decisions that there's nothing that you said that I thought was like, no, don't do that.
Okay.
So I didn't have any comment.
I think the point about being transparent of the function of each of these upper level positions can be addressed with, job description is not really the word, but it is a description of the position, the elements. What is that person, from the board's perspective, supposed to do for the organization? And it could be bullet points, it could be a paragraph. That is up to you, but that will also be helpful in whatever you choose to do and how you select the chief executive, and then how that person selects or recommends for selection the folks on the next level down.
Okay.
Danny, you didn't give your opinion.
My opinion?
Yeah.
I was taking in all your opinions. I agree with a little bit of everything that has been brought up. I mean, everything that's been brought up have been very valid arguments. I want to see us hire the person who's going to just be dynamic. I want that person to just be someone to unify the system, bring everybody together, get rid of the distrust, have the skill set to just make everybody shine. The unicorn, that's the one I want. I want the unicorn.
They exist.
I have a question, just going back to something you just said. You had said that if we had a CEO and then a director of higher education and a director of primary education, you had suggested that like the CEO would hire those two positions. Would it be possible for the board to select all those three positions? Because I just say that because I feel like in my mind, if the CEO is hiring those other two positions, hiring and firing those other two positions, then the CEO kind of controls those positions, which means the CEO really is doing the business stuff that Rafi was talking about, but also controlling the education stuff, which I'm saying, like, an educator should be controlling the education stuff, not, like, the idea of the CEO is we bring in a guy, if my understanding of what was being said, the idea of having a CEO is we have to face serious business issues going forward, but my position is that the operation of this system is education. And if we bring in a business guy and he's de facto controlling the education, that seems problematic to me.
I'm sure it could be like principals. The board would have to ratify or approve the hiring of that individual.
Yeah, you
I
can do it that
definitely
way.
would recommend that the board would ratify those positions as well, just like we do for the principals. Absolutely.
So Michael, are you suggesting maybe that the education person is here and the or what we call it, business person is?
No, I mean, recognizing that the system has business problems.
Right.
I mean, you can't have a principal just say, we're going to put a $20 million addition on a school. I mean, there's business constraints. And if that's something that needs, and, at a business level, you can only have one person cooking the stew here. So I get all that. I just worry empowering a business person to run the educational operations doesn't feel right to me, and is not going to go down well with our employees. That's just my opinion.
I think that's where we were talking about, and even Melissa said, this person has these particular responsibilities, and this is who they report to, and this is what they're responsible for. This person has this. And so I think right now it's like the superintendent, okay, well, he or she's in charge of everything. Well, that doesn't answer our specific questions. So I think, again, the more we discuss and all the specifics and the details of who do we hold responsible for what, and who reports to, all those are things that we will 100% have to answer before we make any decisions.
You look like you want
If
to
I
say
could,
something.
if I could add one thing, the only caution I have about that is putting people together and saying work together at that level that they may not want that person to be. So if the CEO is responsible for academics, basically you're hiring and firing that person based on performance of financials, performance of academics, performance of all those things. And I think that that's how you hold that person accountable. If they make bad selections at the academic level or the academic person, that's going to cost them their job. So they better pick good people, right? But I think if this board says you, CEO, will take that person to be your academic, I've seen that work well, and I've also seen it not work well. So that's the thing. It's like when we made a choice in November who's going to lead the country, right? And that person chooses the people that they work with, and then they're eventually held responsible for it. So I completely understand what you're saying about the academics. Is just my only caution would be is to give at least great deference to that person's choice or who they want to basically control their future, because academics is certainly one of the pillars that will decide whether that person stays or
If
goes.
that's the route this board goes, the only way I see that working is the way we handle principals.
Although,
We're not involved with who they pick. We're involved with approving or disapproving with the hire of that individual.
So let me ask you this. What are the top charter systems? How are they structured?
With or without a management company?
Without a management
Without a management company. A strong dynamic leader who maybe is an educator, maybe is a financial person. They certainly have academic chops, whether they've acquired it or they came from that area. You've got to have a person who has a vision and can convey that to everybody, to the community, to the students, to the parents, to the teachers. That to me, the organizations that struggle are ones that have problems with that leadership quality. Somebody who's accountable, somebody who doesn't deflect, takes responsibility for what is actually happening. And I think that a school that's this size, school system that's this size, I don't think that this should be their first rodeo doing something like this. I think it should be somebody that does it. Is that person in the state of Florida? Is that person, I don't know, in Montana? I don't know. But I think that you're going to want to really look, or is that person sitting in this room right now? It's very possible. But I think that a mission, understanding the mission, the vision, having a passion for doing this, and that you're going to get everything out of them. I think that's what I see. That's what I see the successful leaders doing.
When I think about the systems, the concept you all are discussing right now, they have a strong finance position that informs their position, and then they have a strong academic position. That is a feature that we see in a lot of groups. So the CEO is not everything. They're not the expert on everything. They've got strong individuals who focus on those areas. The concept you're discussing right now of the chief academic, whether it's separated into primary and secondary or just one individual, that person wow, it got very quiet all of a sudden. That person also helps function as mentorship, working with the principals in the educational programs. So we see that too, that then the CEO is not in the weeds on that, so you can have further development. When the curriculum is going to be changed, or there's a change in the state standards or something like that, it's that chief academic person who's working with the principals. So there's consistency, but also so they have support. So that's it's just something else that we see in other systems.
May I add something else? So, something that Mr. Arnold just said about, and he makes a good point, that whoever is the leader really should pick their own cabinet, because they need to work together, in a sense. But off of that, I wonder then, now suddenly I'm back to superintendent, because whoever the leader is, the leader needs to embody the core principal operation of our entity. And to me, the operation is education. Yes, we do need to grow, but if the focus is on growth and we start screwing up education, we're not growing. Maybe it needs to be a superintendent who is an educator, and then below them they have, like, why can't the CFO or some other, why is the business on top and the education in the lower position? Maybe it should be the other way around. I fundamentally believe that education is the core operation.
I don't think anybody's saying it's not.
No, I know.
Our business is education.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of our search for the next leader, it should be coming, in my mind, out of the education community. That's my thought.
So, I'm just going to add my 2 cents. Thinking back on the last search, I'm thinking about now the makeup of the board. Who was responsible for the last search? And the makeup seems to be more corporate as far as business owners, the trustee board, the board. We have some educational people on the board. But I say that to say you got a lot of business owners in charge of selecting an educational person, in the last search for superintendent. When I say I feel like the makeup of the system, what will work better for the makeup of the system is to have a board made up such as ours to maybe look at the corporate side, and I'm not dismissing the educational, the academic side of this, but the board looks at the corporate side. They put that person in place, and now you got that person to make up their cabinet, right? Who can then, to me, get the right people in place. That does take some of the onus off of the board, the stress off of the board, in, getting the educational person in here. Sitting on the last, it just, to me, we have to think about not just, I guess, the teachers, but the system as a whole, and the board included in that. How can the board also make the best decision in getting the right person in place? But that's my 2 cents.
And building on what Tanya said, what I would like to see us do is we're all assigned to a school, have an open conversation with our principal about some of the discussion today. What additional support do you need? What do you want to see in the future superintendent? Because I think, going back to what Mike said, we can ignore the distrust all day, but the distrust is out there. And just for them to have more of that input and be a part of this conversation before we as a board decide to change our organizational structure, I think is important. Because hearing Mr. Unzueta's explanation, that makes sense. But again, I feel like we need to look at our leaders who are the CEOs of their schools and give us input on that direction as well.
As the liaison of your school, you already have that ability. So the task is there, you just have to do it. All right. Anything else y'all want to bring up before? Marie did put that PowerPoint in your packet. Have you looked at that over the weekend? Did y'all get a chance to look at that? Okay. So give that some thought, because that actually drives, once we decide how this position looks, how we obtain that position. So
I think that's what the discussion right now. How do we feel like we want to proceed? Where do we want to go?
Well, I mean, that's I mean, until we decide the position, we can give some thought on that. I just wanted y'all to really digest that. I don't think discussing it now is going to, until we decide what the person looks like and the positions, it really, you can't solicit the position until you know what you're looking for. But, this talks about whether it's a board-conducted, board-directed search, it's externally facilitated, or it's a, headhunter. The last time we used an outside source, and I don't have fond memories of that, but we can discuss that at the next meeting and kind of move through that. All right?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
One of the board members from Polk County recommended I don't know if it's the Florida Charter School Association.
That's
I'm not sure if is that who it was last time? Okay. I wasn't sure what that group was.
No,
I don't know that they're set up to well, I apologize. I don't know exactly who it was that you used.
Do your homework. I encourage you to talk to your schools, be the liaison for your school, get some input from them on the position, which way we go, CEO, superintendent, whether there's support staff under them, so forth. However we decide that, we'll bring that up at the next meeting and have a thorough discussion on that. I just wanted to get the conversation started today. The main intent of the work session today was to get the bylaws done. I think we've achieved that. I wanted to get this part started so next month we can have a more thorough conversation, and I'm sure as we go it'll
So we're going to hire a superintendent next meeting?
No, that's not what I said. That's not what I said. So, anything else y'all want to bring up on what we talked about? Otherwise, I'm going to turn it back over to Al Rickey. Okay, Sean and Melissa, thank y'all for your input on that.
Yeah,
appreciate
absolutely. Thank you.
And Al Rickey, we have, you've got 14 minutes. So I don't know what you're going to get done in 14 minutes, but the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I have Lake Wells PD that has a presentation on safe schools for us, and Officer Malsby was actually here. So are you doing it, Mr. Hernandez? Thank you, sir. I did have a conversation with Officer Malsby as well as Mr. Hernandez a couple days back. So please take a look at that and be kind of prepared to address any questions that you may have. Wow, this is a long meeting. We've been here for a while. We're going to move right into the financials. I'm not going to go through both statements. I will be asking for approval for the November and December financials. We'll just briefly go through the balance sheet only on the December financials, if you can pull up that particular document. And our assets through the month of December is 52.9 million, with our liabilities at 16.1 million. No significant changes on the balance sheet from the month of November to the month of December. If we can move on to our statement of operations, we've collected $24.6 million with $19.8 million in expenditures, with our excess revenues at $4.8 million through this period. Okay. Food service continue to operate in a strong positive position with excess revenues through the month of December of $71,000. And our special revenue programs, our federal programs, we're at 29% of what we budgeted for the year. Important thing to note that our federal entitlements, we're looking for our roll force to come in, and we're adjusting our budgets to meet the second half of the year. Transportation services, we're at 43%, which is actually pretty good compared to where we are for the year at $1,084,000. And the capital projects for Bach North and Bach South is actually, for the PICO funds, are actually represented.
Speaking of transportation, I got a quick question. Sean, I'm sorry to bring you up again. Did I see that the start times statute is being challenged, or?
I think it's being discussed.
Okay.
We have had we have multiple clients that runs two sessions a day. And so that idea about not starting before 8:30 was good. And usually those are troubled populations, or dropout prevention schools, other things like that. Or they go to school in the morning and then they work, or they work in the morning and they come in the afternoon, and that's really antithetical to those to those things. So we've asked DOE to look at it and perhaps create an opt-out system. But now I've seen like our home county superintendent is telling parents to come out locally against it. So that's going to be a policy decision of what happens, probably driven at the local level. I know there was science behind the decision to do it, but the operations maybe is now
It makes transportation very difficult. That's what made me think of it. Transportation becomes an issue. So
yeah, and that was one of the things of having the different times to do it. You're almost taking the current transportation system and flipping it on its head. That the elementary kids are going to go early and the high school go late. So.
That's okay. We got Sean here. We got to take advantage of it. Personnel changes are as presented, and I think we just have two there on the instructional side. Well, that's fairly brief discussion, but that's the end of the report. If any board member has any questions about November or December, feel free to address me now or even in the follow-up meeting. But this is what we have here today is what we're requesting approval of. Okay. Superintendent update. The schools are in the second phase of progress monitoring, and after visiting with most of them, they are actually taking that data and adjusting their school improvement plans, attempting to tap into additional resources that we may have, along with adjusting their revising their budgets to address certain needs that they may have at this time. We're still doing our lunch and learns. We have a couple of them scheduled this week, so you have an opportunity, board members actually will have an opportunity to speak with their school leadership about any topic, along with the ones we've talked about today, as well as what I'm requesting the schools to do is provide in-depth needs assessment, not only just academic, but also school-wide, which would include facilities. So you get an opportunity to spend some time with your leadership at those locations and discuss some things very near and dear to those schools. And last but not least, we're still having our meetings around the system on attendance. We want to try to get to a point to where we have a meaningful discussion later on in the spring about that. I think that will go hand in hand with some discussions that Sean and I've had about our enrollment policy and some other things that we may have going on. So those things will be discussed a little bit later on in the spring, but we definitely want to kind of keep attendance as part of it. I've heard from most of you, and most of you want to take some measures, board-related policy, and kind of put in place to kind of aid the schools with getting students here. And that concludes my my update. November 18, 2014 minutes, work session. You should have those available. And our next board meeting is February, well, I want to ask the board, can we actually push that meeting back? That is our budget revision meeting, and that kind of puts a tight squeeze on the finance team to actually prepare the financials along with the budget and get those in. So is it possible for us to push that back? And I think in the future I ask that request every year, so we'll make sure that we, try to schedule it so you won't have to readjust your schedules in the future.
Can we move it to the 24th back on a Monday? I think Dr. Johnson has a problem with Tuesdays.
I'm fine with the 24th if the board
That gives you
would
another
actually.
week.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I know Ms. Art and the rest of the team will appreciate that as well, the finance team.
We're good with that?
Yeah.
Okay. So the 24th?
Okay. So Monday, 24th, February 24th, here at Lake Wells High School, if the board confirms that in the meeting, will be our next scheduled meeting. Chairman report.
Thank you, Ricky. I have nothing else. Is there anything else trustees want to bring up before we move on?
The Teacher Compensation Committee met last week. The teachers have gotten their raises, and Julie was still working on the retro, and they're hoping they have those by January 31st. But going to the start dates, I talked to a board member with our host district, and they've kind of put theirs on hold because they're trying to advocate to make it more of a local decision instead of a state decision, because at the elementary level, obviously the impact on young kids, but at the high school level and even middle school level, the impact on athletics as well. So even our host district is still in the very beginning stages. They've talked some alternatives.
Maybe that's where I heard it. I heard it somewhere.
But he said they're advocating, I don't know if it's through a lobbyist or not, but to make it more of a local decision than a state decision. And then just some shout outs, just for all of our schools. Having the 2 hurricane interruptions, they have not missed a beat with their commitment to our students and the families. If you go on social media, I think every single one of our schools has had different family nights, and that's just awesome to see, just that they're continuing. Just some special shout outs. I joined Janie Howard Wilson for their spelling bee, and the kids that were eliminated were all above their grade level before they were eliminated. And so that was just an awesome day for me. Warner's mascot, Duke, and I went to a literature night at Hillcrest just before Christmas. And I also want to shout out Ty Hirschberger there. She's got the digital art studio and just was awarded a grant to add to that program for her students. I want to give a shout out to Sherry Cooper. She was a teacher at Polk Avenue for over 42 years who recently passed away. So just for me, I did my internship at Polk Avenue, and she was one of my mentors when I was there. So that's just a tremendous loss for the Polk Avenue family and all those that knew and loved her. So Bach North, I visited his school, I think 5 days. I judged debates. It was 8th graders that are working on a 9th grade curriculum, and those kids were super impressive. My last day, one little boy, his partner was sick, so he had to do the entire debate by himself, and he literally was the best I have seen. So just kudos to Bach North, just the preparation of those students. And for Bach South, their ag program continues with their students. A couple just went to the Southwest Florida Fair and rated in the top 10. So all of our schools have some truly phenomenal stuff going on. So kudos to all of you for the job that you're doing.
Well, that or you can save it for the regular meeting if you want.
Just want to get the regular meeting started. I'll wait.
All right, Alricky, back to you.
I'm sorry. I have my school updates. They have been presented in a summary format that we've kind of put together. Love it. You're welcome, Mr. Blair. The schools are available if they would like to come up and present further information on them. I'll leave that at their discretion. No? No takers today? I'm sorry. Yeah, there's no questions, board. All right, any other business? All right, meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
All right, folks, we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we will start our regular meeting at 5:40. Okay, welcome back and good evening, everybody. We're going to call the Board of Trustees meeting to order. Pastor Andy Blair, will you lead us in the invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance?
Father, we thank you. We're grateful for the opportunity to be here once again tonight. And Lord, we just ask that you bless our time, keep our minds open, and give us the wisdom to make the decisions that we need to make. It's in your name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Where's the flag?
Just imagine it's something.
All right. It's over there on that wall.
I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Folks, before you have a seat, can I ask you, we lost a dear member of our team and friend and classmate on January 1st. So I ask that each of you join me in a moment of silence for David Waldron. Thank you. Moving through the agenda, Marie, do we have any scheduled persons to address the board on agenda items?
No.
Thank you, ma'am. Next item is the approval of the Board of Trustees work session minutes as presented during the work session.
So moved.
I have a motion by Raphael. Second by Lori. Any comments or questions? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. Next item is the approval of the Board of Trustees meeting minutes as presented during the work session.
So moved.
I have a motion by Lori, second by Andy. Any comments or question on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. Financial report. CFO, anything you want to add?
No, sir, just requesting that's presented.
Okay. We were presented the financial report during the work session. If you have any questions for our CFO, now would be a time. If not, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
I have a motion by Lori,
Second.
by Raphael. Any comments or questions on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. Next item is personnel changes as presented during the work session. There was 2 on there that were out of field, is that correct? I'll entertain a motion for approval.
So moved.
I have a motion by Andy,
Second.
second by Lori. Any comments or questions on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. Next item is the superintendent report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have nothing to add to that report. Next meeting date is February 24th. Board work session at 4 o'clock, and the board meeting is at 5:30.
Duly noted the date change to February 24th. Work session at 4 o'clock, meeting at 5:30. Next item is scheduled persons to address the board, non-agenda item. Marie, do we have anybody scheduled?
No, sir.
Okay. Chairman's report. I have nothing else to talk about. I am talked out. So trustees, I'll give you an opportunity if you have a report that you'd like to present. If you're on a committee or a chair of that or anything of that nature and you want to share that report, now would be the time. Thank you.
Just really quick update on 1919. The windows are in, and so we're making real progress now. So Mr. Smith is doing a great job of keeping that project on track.
For Kentucky, we have windows.
Now, windows. Yeah.
Tanya? Thank you, ma'am. Anything else? Okay. Raphael?
Yep. Okay, I wish the principals were still here, but that's okay. But I wanted to thank them each for making time out of their schedules over the last several weeks to meet with me. It's important, as we discussed today, to have complete transparency, and I did not want the principals to learn about my recommendations here at the board meeting. So I met with every principal at their school to discuss what I had planned to present and the reasons for it, and to get their input, because again, that's important for us to hear from our principals. So thank you to each one of them. I also wanted to mention briefly, a couple months ago, I asked Ms. Barrow to sit down with me and kind of educate me on the ESC processes at the charter schools. I have a heart for ESC folks, mainly because of my daughter. And boy, it was very enlightening. I was glad to see that she's in that position, and I came away from that meeting with some really great feelings about what Lake Wales Charter School is doing to service our ESC students. Part of that conversation also transferred to other issues that some of our students face, behavioral issues, attendance issues. So that prompted me to reach out to Janie Howard, my assigned school, and I set up a meeting with Ms. Barrow and with Ms. Griffiths to discuss those situations. You know, people look at Janie Howard's score, their school grade, and they make preconceived assumptions. I would encourage every trustee to visit not only their assigned school, but every school. Because if you were to visit Janie Howard, Kim is excellent at keeping data, and she will be happy to show you that gains are being made. They are moving forward in impressive ways. So I would encourage everybody to make those rounds. But what impressed me most is the out-of-the-box thinking that Ms. Griffiths, Ms. Alexander, excuse me, are kind of exploring. They are opening a mentorship program at that school. I was so impressed by their plans, and also my heart was touched by the needs of those troubled students that I volunteered myself as one of their mentors. So I'm super excited because statistically, students that have a troubled home life, if there's a mentor in their life, that makes a huge difference to them as a person, scholastically and individually. So if I can just encourage everybody to get out there. That's all I have.
Thanks, Raphael. Mike, do you have a report?
I said all my piece later. Earlier.
Okay. I know everybody's tired. We talked a lot. So, any other business for the good of the cause? Hearing none, meeting adjourned. Thank you all so much. Appreciate it.